Are we rolling?
Yeah, we're all good.
Yes. Okay, so to start, Jess, I know you quite well. Well, I feel like I know you really well. But for those that don't know you, who are you? Give me a bit of background as well. Who's Jess?
Yeah. My name is Jess, obviously. I mean, that goes without saying. I was born in a tiny town in central Queensland, Australia. And I moved to London about 6 years ago. I'm currently the group head of talent for McCann World Group based in London. And I previously have worked at a kind of bunch of startups, including 2 Google Ventures startups, Yieldify and Wonderbly. Some big companies you may know and hate or love, depending, Goldman Sachs and BHP Billiton. And then also a really beautiful business called Box. So I've got kind of spanned big corporate, little startup, and now I'm back into kind of the bigger corporate world. Personally, I'm really into bikes. I'm the founder of the UK's first all-women track cycling team, although now we're not track specific anymore, and there's about, 65 members, I think. And I'm also the founder of a feminist film club called the Bechdel Club, which also has about 55 members, and we get together every month to talk about female representation in film.
Amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's dope, right? I've got really good stickers too. I can give you some.
Give me a sticker after
Yeah. No.
And have you, so when you talked about those previous companies as well, have you always been head of people, talent? Have you always been in that realm?
Yeah, so I've always worked in people and talent. I actually, at university, I studied journalism and communication, and I majored in publishing and editing, and I was specifically into poetry because I didn't want to get employed, I guess. But I got an internship at Cambridge University Press in Melbourne, and I also got an internship in HR. And my parents really wanted me to take that internship because it was in the town closest to them. And I fell in love as a 20-year-old girl and was like, I'm going to take the HR one because it's close to this boy, which is in retrospect the stupidest decision to take a job. But I ended up really loving it, and I don't even know that guy's name anymore. So that's obviously not important. But since then, I've always worked in people, and I really, really love what that gave me. And I've kept, poetry and film and all those other kind of more creative parts of me as passions. But I really do found I found a vocational home in helping people be their best selves at work. And I've always been really super into it. And I think I've gotten deeper and deeper into the kind of emotional side of employee well-being as I've continued my journey into HR.
Is that where mental health came into it? The more you got into people, the emotional side,
yeah,
kind of mental health emerged from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the very beginning, I was super lucky. I had an amazing mentor called Monica, who I still am in touch with, and she was really good at helping me kind of peel the layers back on why people wanted to work for our company at BHP and what made them happy. And the more and more layers you kind of peel away, the more you realize that what really happiness at work is about feeling psychologically safe and feeling like you be your kind of authentic self and really achieve something and have purpose. And I think that ties to kind of just the general life people want to live. They want to be able to feel like they're happy, psychologically safe, and have purpose in work, in life, in their relationships. And since then, I've kind of peeled away more of those layers and tried to figure out how do we allow people to really have those 3 things: psychological safety, kind of purpose, and kind of a sense of general well-being or happiness. And I was at a diversity and inclusion event a couple of years ago, and this is way before I kind of worked with Sanctus or really started assessing and picking apart mental health and well-being at work. And one of the things that came up was I thought, what is the next thing on the frontier beyond diversity and inclusion? How else can we kind of push this message? And one of the things that kind of immediately came up in the group I was talking to was mental health and well-being, and that is the next kind of thing that we need to focus on. And it was just this light switched on. I was like, oh my god, of course, duh. We need to be able to allow people from all walks of life to feel comfortable, but people in all different stages of their lives, mentally and physically, and psychologically, and everything else. And that was when I was like, okay, I need to start reading more about this.
So you had a light bulb moment of and this was what, 3 years ago?
It's probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I just finished working at Box, and I was just starting to work with Yieldify and Wonderbly at that point.
Interesting. And that's when we first kind of met, or you first met James.
Yeah, so it would have been a couple of months later. And I was kind of going through my own stuff at the time as well. So meeting James was really awesome. a member of our team, Ira, who now lives in Portugal on an almond farm, which I mean, she's like living her like best life, right? So she's got her mental health and well-being fully under control. She actually knew James. So she'd read his article or watched them before, I think. I started this thing or managed this thing called Lunch and Learn, where we invited members of the community to come in and talk to the members of the Wonderly team about anything. So it could have been about a startup or a story. So we had people that had ridden across America. We had people that had started small tech startups. We had people that had worked with children to make art. And James came in to talk about his article. And I think this is like even pre-Sanctus. Like he like had a logo I think he made on like Logo Joy or something.
A man on a mission.
yeah,
he was.
So he told his story and it was just so compelling and so honest, and I was like, yeah, I want to like be mates with this guy and go wherever this is going. I think this is a great idea.
So it resonated because you'd had that light bulb moment sort of almost through work, and then personally you were also going through stuff, so that when you heard James talking in the way that he was, it was like, fuck, that's the way we need to talk.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think the other thing as well is in work, I'm also really passionate about working with smaller, and I think especially local businesses and startups to kind of cultivate what they're working on. So I do that with a couple of different businesses. Sanctus is one that straight away, what I was looking for really was someone who wanted to work in the mental health space in a more corporate environment. So not just a therapist or an app, but I wanted someone that wanted to do something more tangible. And I wanted to work with them to try and say like, well, influence them in a really not Machiavellian way and say like, this is what I really need. Like, is this something that you think you can help us with? And I saw something in James where he was really passionate. He needed a bit of help and direction about like where this was best going to work because he'd never been in a people role in a startup before. And we just started chatting and I realized that he wanted to do almost exactly what I thought was going to be great for a business. So I like barely helped him. I like watered his little seed one time and then he just like kind of blossomed Sanctus and started working with me.
But you were Wonderbly Lost My Name at the time, one of the first businesses that James did a talk at. You were in those early Sanctus groups as well, the kind of Fight Club-esque Sanctus groups. You were one of the first Sanctus users. So yeah, that was a pivotal time for Sanctus, but it also sounds like for you and for the company as well. And I think I wanted to ask, so for Lost My Name at the time, I keep calling them Lost My Name because that's what they were at the time.
That's fine. Everyone does that.
Before you came in or before you had that moment, what was the approach or culture like when you first joined? And maybe the approach towards mental health, was there one?
I think it was like so many businesses, there was a general, I don't think tolerance is the right word, but I think maybe like a general like comfort around, you can talk about whatever, we want you to be happy, but there's a very different thing between saying, we want you to be happy, we want to support you, and saying like, we've put these things in place because we can and we will. And I think Wonderbly was definitely in that first camp because I think at that point, to be honest, most businesses just hadn't found that partner yet. They didn't know how to best build something that supported their employees beyond like putting maybe a note on the wall saying like everyone's a bit crazy here or something, or like having their people team like meet with people in one-to-ones and just chat about how they were feeling, or having like even an ERP or some kind of like employee referral phone number that they could call when they're having a tough time. Beyond that, there wasn't really a lot going on. And I think Wonderbly was in that camp, and that's not a bad thing because there wasn't another option at that point, I think, or at least another clear option, especially for smaller businesses. So they were very supportive of moving towards something more structured, but I think it just needed like a true path and a champion and like an understanding of what kind of that outcome was going to look like. So
the seeds were already there, a company that did care and wanted to do right for their employees, but they needed someone like you to like bring it together and make it a real thing.
Yeah, but surely you see that with most businesses.
Yeah, 100%.
Like most value-driven businesses have people there that want to say we're doing something really tangible and really valuable, but they just don't know how to make that a reality, right?
I think one thing we see a lot of is a lot of the time we'll see companies that don't have that from the start. So I'll meet a lot of people where they might be in a similar role, head of people, head of talent, and they really understand, they've had that light bulb moment, they've had the click, but then they're kind of on their own in there. They're kind of the only champion, and actually That is really difficult, I think, for people to do it alone, sort of thing. But it's still you still need that person to start it and bring it together. But what's interesting to hear is like it was already kind of there, but you really started to shape it. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And how? Sorry, I've got another question. So when you first, I'm just going back to those early days, and the theme of this is mental health on a budget. Was there like a well-being budget? Was there a mental health budget when you first joined?
Oh, babe. When I first joined, Wonderbly lost my name, which is, again, not a bad thing. This was a startup I joined. We just got Series A. We were like babies. Our whole people strategy was, if you got an issue, share it on Slack. And if you want to recruit someone, then you put a blackboard out the front that's like, are you a UX designer? Come in and chat to us. Like it was bare bones, and everything was, and that's the joy of working in a startup, right? It's a sandbox. You need to build everything. So it meant that I needed to, secure budget in a really clear, structured way. I think you need to move away from being nebulous about these things when you are working with small budgets, because if a startup reaches a point where they're struggling or need to prove that they want to go back for more investment, the first place they're going to come sniffing is what budget doesn't look like it's actually tied to some kind of ROI or some kind of value. So I started building out cases for what we needed as basics. And for me, learning and development and mental health support were two of those massively. And the reason why for me was I had seen so many people at startups burn out. And it is a culture that I think leans itself towards that. No more necessarily than a big corporate business. It's just in a very different way. But also I think is much more tolerant towards talking about it. Whereas in corporate businesses, it tends to be, I think, slightly more taboo. And maybe that's a huge generalization, and someone listening to this is going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? But for me, the big thing was to kind of carve out this budget for learning and development, but also personal psychological safety and development, because I think they're so intertied. And then also to look towards better ways of kind of supporting our people and mobility and all those kinds of other things.
So you had to build it from the ground up. So you had to go with a budget of 0.
Yes.
And then convince, I don't know, the FD or the team to be like, look, give me, 5, 10,000, whatever it was at the time.
Yes.
How did you find that?
It was tough. I think I knew it was something that I personally wanted, and I tried to think about like how would I make my voice heard if I wasn't in the position where my voice is the one primarily being listened to in this conversation. So I set up lots of opportunities for people to kind of share what they were interested in having. Lunch and Learn was a great one. We're bringing people in from different parts of the community to talk about different projects that we're working on, James being one of them, opened up this kind of door to say like, we should talk about mental health. And then subsequent to that, there was more conversations. We also had lots of channels on Slack to talk about interesting articles, things that we were reading, other programs different startups were doing. Made a big effort, me and the team, to kind of put on different programs other startups were working on, and just encourage conversation like, what do you think? Is this something you'd be interested in? Also send out lots of surveys asking people like how they were doing anonymously, and also having one-to-ones with individuals, just talking about what we could do to support them. The other big thing that I did was I sat down and I wrote all the policy handbook, which doesn't sound particularly fun, but wrote the policy handbook. And one of the biggest things I wanted to do was make sure our entire ways of working was underpinned really truly by the values that we held as a business. And at Wonderbly, they were kind, curious, and courageous. And I think kindness is a really important one in this instance. Perhaps more than the others, which is you need to be kind to yourself and kind to others. So all of the policies that we wrote in that policy handbook had the underpinning of kindness, curiosity, and courage. And kindness and courage came out very strongly in the kind of health and well-being policies. So things like maternity and paternity, but also sickness. And for me, it was a natural progression to make sure sickness also covered mental health. And that was a massive first step for us. So we said there's no differentiation between a sick day if you're feeling mentally unwell and a sick day if you've got a cold. Either way, you call in sick, you get the same amount of sick days matched, doesn't matter. You don't need to differentiate in your Slack message or text message or phone call. You just need to say, I'm not feeling well today. That's it. If you've been feeling unwell for 7 days straight, you go and get a doctor's certificate. And that can be either I'm having a really tough time with stress, or I'm coping with grief, or I'm just overwhelmed, or I've got anxiety, or it can be I've got a cold, I broke my leg, whatever. And I think that complete decoupling and stopping saying mental health day, sick day, meant that people felt really comfortable just to talk about it, I think, a lot easier. And that was a big thing for us. And then after that, it kind of opened the doors to say, like, well, isn't it natural that we have a program around cycling to work? Why shouldn't we also have one about just having a conversations? And then there's also all the massive backing up of statistics and studies around sick days because of mental health that we were completely unable to track or manage. And now we found huge reductions, actually. And very few people took sick days at Wonderly.
So it sounds like you did a lot on nothing. So the kind of you crowdsourced conversations, you got people into the talks, you shared information. A few years ago, making a statement like a mental health day is just the same as a physical health day, as a sick day. That is a huge statement, and you did that. That cost you nothing to do.
Yeah.
And all of that then started, by the sounds of it, you kind of crowdsourced that in this wave. So when it did actually come to the point where you were like, actually, I want to spend a bit of money on this. Actually, it wasn't just you by this point. It was actually the conversation had changed internally across the whole team.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other stories that I have in my history, which I think really interesting, and I didn't work at the company anymore, and I won't name the company, but a really, really solid member of the team had one of their parents pass away. And he needed to travel to the funeral and subsequently had multiple days where he was suffering immense grief. After the funeral, his standard compassionate leave had expired. There's 3-4 days a year, whatever it was. And then he needed to take extra days just because he just couldn't get out of bed. Like, he couldn't overcome this huge amount of grief in his life. And after the 5th or 6th day, he was informed by the HR team that unfortunately he needed to return to work or get a sick leave for physical sickness. Otherwise, he would be going on to statutory pay or potentially face a chance of being terminated from the business. At which point he made the, I think, very brave decision to resign from the workplace. And even if he was not, I think, a star performer, that is so terrifying. Like, even just the cost implication of that. In the UK, we're looking at an average of like a £42,000 a year salary, that's very London specific. So if you're like listening from Manchester or Glasgow or in Europe, very different, right? But if you're looking at £42,000 a year, it costs almost £50,000 to re-recruit, train, upskill, downtime, onboarding one individual. So that costs that business £50,000, and that's assuming he's on the average salary, and that's assuming he's not a star performer, which both of those things aren't true. And like, that to me is just so worrying. If you can avoid that happening even one time by having the opportunity to allow people to take days off because they're grieving or anxious, or allowing people the space and opportunity to feel psychologically safe, then like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And I think that's a really key thing, because I think you started by saying as a values-based company, something like supporting the team felt right, just felt right. And then there was this second movement of like the crowd or the team saying, this is something we care about. And the kind of third thing that you mentioned there was like, actually, no, there is tangible cost implications to not supporting people as well. And that comes after caring about your team.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. What I've seen, I don't know how you've managed to do this, but to translate to an FD, a lot of the time they're not on the ground feeling what you feel or knowing what you know. So it does need to be translated in some way. Did you have to do that in it, like a physical report where you showed, or have you ever had to do it where you've had to show an FD, look, this has cost us 50K?
Yeah.
And has that helped?
I think the important thing is to not let it get to the stage where you have to say this has cost us. I think you're better off saying this potentially could cost us. And there are cost implications of each of those 3 stages, right? The cost of the first stage, which is not living your values every day, is there are genuine cost implications in your employer brand and your ability to recruit people if you aren't genuinely sharing the values that you have as a business. And I think those can be very easily managed through your applicant tracking system if you use one, and very easily managed through the feedback you're getting from candidates in terms of, do you genuinely believe these people are living their values, and engagement surveys, exit surveys, and any kind of other ongoing data points that you get with individuals, including employee referrals, I think, which is a massive, massive indication of a really strong values-based culture. The Second thing you just talked about was like allowing people the open space to communicate and talk about kind of bringing their best selves to work. And I think you see massive uplifts in people's performance. You see massive uplifts in the social connections between individuals, especially cross-functionally, which is hugely, hugely beneficial in terms of work production and the kind of complexities of work, because people are capable of seeing how they can produce better qualities of work working cross-functionally, and those connections can only truly be created through allowing people to talk more socially with each other and more personally, and that's also very easily managed and trackable. I think it's just really important to say I'm a huge believer of, as Machiavellian and kind of Orwellian as it seems, like I think you should collect data on people. With their permission, you should be transparent. You should show them the data you're collecting and help them understand why and what you're doing with it. But you should have a very, very good applicant tracking system. You should have a very, very good HRIS. You should have a very, very good way of collecting engagement surveys and how people are feeling. And these things don't need to cost anything. You can, go for a really cheap or free ATS. Charlie HR is very, very good and free if you're under a certain amount of headcount. Google Forms or Typeform, whatever it is very good at creating ways to connect with people. All of these data points can very clearly say, if we are taking care of our people and they have an opportunity to share and connect, and they have a true values-based life at the company you're building, then it will have better cost implications future for us. And you can forecast those improvements longer term. And I think the final thing is sharing those anecdotal pieces of business ROI, like how much it costs to replace someone that leaves because of non-supportive mental health during periods of grief, how likely someone is to feel periods of grief or anxiety or depression during their working year, and how those touch points can massively improve their retention of your star performers. All of these things are very, very easy to prove. You just need to kind of sit down and
spend time on it,
get the basics.
And what's really interesting is you didn't just look at the cost implication, it's also the upside of investing in people. What does that look like? What's the potential opportunity of that? I think that's really interesting.
If you're scaling a business, and every startup is, right? Because the whole thing is growth mindset. Like, we want to scale, get big, get big, get big. If you know right now that you're improving the quality of work of your employees and the production and whatever it may be, and it ultimately comes down to capitalistic means, right? We have to make it that way because we live in a capitalistic society. But if you're improving production, if you're improving the quality of that work, when you've got 10 people, you can map that out fairly reasonably to say it's going to continue. Those trends will continue as long as we support individuals. Markets are getting tougher in Britain. I think Brexit will double down those difficulties in terms of attracting great people. People are looking for purpose. People are looking for psychological safety. People are looking for growth. If you can give them that, then I think you're in much better place than some of your competitors out there in the market.
Yeah. And 100%. And to be honest, when I talk to you about it, it seems obvious, but I think a lot of people are in businesses where spending an extra, even on a small budget, maybe a £500 a month or £1,000 a month, feels like, we never spent that before. So now you're asking us to invest something into our team that feels like expensive.
Yeah.
But I think when you chat, I think what's just landing for me is actually you did a lot for nothing on zero. Mm-hmm. And I know when we chatted, when you did get budget, it's not like you had a £1 million budget. You had a super small budget and you stretch it really far. So
yeah. I
suppose what would be your advice looking back to people that are in that position that either have a zero budget or a small budget? Mm-hmm. What should they do?
I think be resourceful. I think most people, especially in this space, are very, very open to helping you out. If it's just a talk or sharing articles with you or doing a focus group, people will help you out with limited cost, I think. And you can do some things that are cheap to free. And I think just opening that conversation, opening that door means that you're in the future opening the door to more budget, right? So take every penny you can and put it into something that, doubles that spend, whether that be, doing a breakfast on a Friday morning when people get together and talk about how they're feeling or how the week went, or making sure you start and end every meeting with something people are excited about for the week and something they're proud about. Those kinds of things open those doors to talking about feelings, talking about emotions, talking about things people are proud about. And then once you start getting a little bit of budget, invest it in things that really deeply impact people and that shares that word of mouth. So Sanctus is great for that, I think. It is not a small cost in terms of you've got a small budget, but I think it's one of the great things you can do that have a deep and long-lasting impact on people, because it is a democracy of choice. People can choose to come to Sanctus, which I think is really important. From every level of the business, they can choose to come to it. You're not saying to people like, it's only the finance team that get the access to this or whatever it may be. People can opt in. And I think one of the scariest things about mental health is it feels so gigantic and nebulous. And it's very easy to like kind of mentally flagellate yourself if people still are struggling with something, but you're never, ever going to reach a point ever in a million years in a company where you haven't got people feeling down. It's always going to happen. And I think I meet a lot of people that say like, we invest all this money and we're trying really hard and we've got mental health days and blah, 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 blah. And yet still 3 people in our team like haven't come to work for a week because they're not doing very well. And it's like, well, yeah, but think about all the other people that, you've improved the quality of life. You're never going to stop people from having shitty times. You're just going to help them through it. And I think that's the most important thing. So use your small budget and just look forward.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And fast forward to now. Things are very different. You're a much bigger company, McCann. I think they've got to be one of the biggest. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 20,000 people.
Wow.
It's massive. It's huge.
So it's a completely different world for you as well. Like we chatted before this, it's a completely different role compared to the kind of smaller team where you're very much in amongst the trenches with the team and feeling what you've just felt, kind of maybe those 2 or 3 employees that aren't in a good place. So what's been the biggest difference for you shifting and more specifically around mental health as well and the approach? What's been the biggest change for you or difference from moving from more of a startup world to like a big company like McCann?
There's like a personal change, right? Like it's a big different job. And I think that's tough for anyone to go through this big period of like personal reflection. So often every book you read about change is always about like influencing change on other people and how they feel. But no one ever says like, no one's written a book, and I would love if someone can like recommend one. No one writes a book about like how you feel if you're the one trying to influence change. Like it's fucking tough. Like it's so hard to be that change driver. And that's currently the seat I'm sitting in. So previously at Wonderbly and Yieldify and Box, I was building something. Everyone was on board. Everyone wanted to create something. And now I'm in a company where I'm trying to change people's mindsets, which is crazy, crazy different and really tough on me and my team. So that's really interesting and a new kind of mental health challenge, I think, generally. But moving aside from me, I think the business, it's a much bigger business. There's lots more things going on. There's more budget, more stakeholders, more concern, more proof that's needed, more finance, more P&Ls. Like it's just, there's more. There are teams in my teams doing great stuff. We're developing this really awesome piece of work called Leo, which is an acronym for Let It Out. It's a messenger bot. I think a lot of people are looking into the bot space to try and limit how difficult it is to reach people, especially in a really large company. It's a messenger bot. It's completely free. We've put it out there in the great big world. We're still working on it though, so I think it might not be on the App Store yet, but out there in the great big world, so anyone can do it. And basically you can just check in. It uses natural language processing to check in on how you are and suggest things like, hey, maybe it's a good idea for you to take a break from work. Maybe it's a good idea for you to go chat to someone. It sounds like you're really stressed out. Maybe it's a good idea for you to like take 10 minutes, just like do some mindfulness. Or maybe you're feeling really, really down and you need to call someone. And it links you back to, suicide prevention or mental health awareness hotlines. So that's like a small project that we're working on, primarily out of actually Manchester Central, actually. So Birmingham and Milton Keynes.
Cool.
We've got mental health for first aiders, which is something that we did at a much smaller scale at Wonderbly, but now have in a much bigger capacity. We still do kind of lunch and learns. I have nothing to do with them now though, because that's got their whole own team, which is a new thing for me as well. So I'm very used to having my tentacles on everything, and now I'm kind of put back into, right, other teams do this, you just like help them if you need to. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I think as well, so the theme of this is budget. I think I would assume bigger budget, so you were the people team at Wonderbly. Now it sounds like there's a team within a team, and you're
there's
in a
teams
much
within teams within teams. It's like a Russian doll in there, yeah.
Exactly. So budgets and everything is on a much bigger scale, but does that equal better mental health?
I think it is just a different challenge. Right? I don't think it's hard to say, does that equal better mental health? I don't think budget is the indicator, right? I don't think the amount of money you have changes your capacity to do great work for your team. No. We're really lucky. We have budget for this. But I mean, there's probably still people that feel like they're not being touched by that budget. And that's always the challenge, right? Trying to do something for everyone with whatever you have. And that doesn't change if you've got £1 million or £25.
And doing the right thing, like knowing at that scale as well, thousands of people, what's right for all of that huge group it must be difficult.
Yeah, I think it's really hard, and they're very different groups of people in the company. I think at One we were also close. You could almost like text them on the weekend and then come over for coffee or whatever. Like, and now it's just a completely different ballgame. So you don't know personally people. And I'm going to go completely off piece here, but I think there's something really interesting. I went to this talk last week, and I'm going to completely slaughter the name of this company, but it's like the shoe repair company, the Key. What's it called?
I know who you mean. I don't know them.
Right. But anyway, so their CEO is awesome. He was talking at this event, and this was something that I thought about what could be really cool, and it's baking mental health in some way or like personal connection into your KPIs. So the area managers of that shoe business, which we'll call Tiffins for the sake of this conversation, the area managers for that shoe business, their KPI is not how much their stores are selling or how profitable they are. Their KPI is that they can name by full name every person that works in their store, name their children, name their last holiday, and name what they're most interested in.
Wow.
So that means every single store manager has a deep personal connection to every single person they manage. And that it like in turn increases their profitability, increases their happiness, increases their engagement, increases their sense of ownership and connection with the business.
Hold on, is this Timpsons?
Yes, Timpsons.
Timpsons
Wow. Does that. What an awesome KPI.
Which you would never expect from a shoe repair company.
Yeah,
you know
so they give them all a quiz at the end of each quarter, and in the quiz is questions that the people in the teams have put in, like, what's the name of my firstborn child? What's the name of my dog? Where was my last holiday? And the area manager needs to know 90% of this quiz in order to pass their KPIs.
Wow. But that costs nothing as well.
That costs nothing.
No.
And like, imagine how connected you'd be if, like, I mean, yeah, there's something slightly strange about knowing they're being quizzed on it, but I think it would have to feel genuine. Like, it would have to be genuine. People don't learn everything about other people because they're being KPI'd on it. They do it because they want to. And the KPI thing is just a backing up of like, we care about this, I think. Yeah. So I think that could be really cool. If you've got a business, like, add in a KPI for your managers that says, yes, increase your team capacity, increase their output, increase their growth, but also know every single person by name, know what their favorite movie is, or know their last holiday, or know their firstborn child, or whatever it may be. I think that would just be such a positive step into really getting those human connections and making people feel more psychologically safe to talk.
Definitely. And the more we talk, the more I actually don't think this is about budget. Do you know what I mean?
It is a bit, but it's bigger than that.
It is bigger than that. It's kind of what you were talking about there on both levels, from a huge company down to a fast-growing startup. You just mentioned there, it has to be genuine. Like, people have to genuinely want to do it. And I think that sounds like actually the challenge that you've overcome each time in different businesses. You've either convinced or encouraged, like, the team or the CFO or leaders in the business to understand the importance of psychological care, of supporting your team and actually investing in it, not just financially, but genuinely through a change in a policy, like a sick day or something like that, like at Timpsons, where, that is just like a simple thing that the team has said, right, this is important to us. This is a new KPI. We're going to roll it out because we genuinely believe that it's important, costs nothing, and actually has a huge impact on people's connections at the company.
Yeah.
What would be, to wrap up, because
Okay.
I feel like there's so much more I would love to talk to you about. And actually, I would love to bring you back on in like 6 to 12 months once you're like, because I know you're quite settled at McCann, but I know over the next like 12 months, like, you're going to do so much more. And I would love to hear, like, what have you learned? Like, what's been your biggest challenges? So 100%, if you don't mind, I'd love to do this again. But what would be your biggest sort of takeaway or biggest piece of advice to somebody that's in your position either now or maybe in a smaller company? Where do they, like, what do they do? What's the one biggest thing that you would like people to take away?
So I actually wrote down notes on this, so it's going to feel quite structured, but I think the 3 biggest things you need to think about when you're in a position where you really care about mental health and you want to do something about it is, first of all, lean on others. So encourage talking, openness, trust, allow spaces for that. And that's budget and non-budget related. Budget related, ask others for favors. Ask if you can get them to come in and swap them for like a book if your company makes books, or breakfast if you have free breakfast, whatever it may be. The second thing is it's okay to be uncertain. It's okay to fail. It's okay to feel like you're kind of grinding your gears. Mental health is riddled with uncertainty in science, in practicality, in business. It's an uncertain kind of field we're playing on right now, and it's okay to feel like you haven't got all the answers. And I think the third thing is allow your team some space to play and feel connections with each other. I think that is such a huge contributor towards psychological safety and happiness and purpose. So allow them space to feel creative, to work with each other, to be open with each other, to get to know each other. And allowing people space for play really does allow people room to feel more connected to each other at work, and subsequently feel like they're capable of talking about stuff more naturally, I think.
Love it. Good. They were great. Written
Thanks.
down as well.
I know. I was like, look at my crazy notes. I was like, yeah, I can actually use my notes for something.
No, to be honest, just thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me. I think genuinely, I mean this. I felt lucky to get to know you over the last few years, and just to spend time this morning just to chat through. I think like the kind of person you are, and like the kind of work you're doing, you're always pushing things, always growing, always doing things differently. So yeah, it's been great.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks so much, Jess.
I love you guys too.
Boom.